Hello and welcome again to Nurse Nikki O. Thank you so much for joining in. Of course, we are continuing in our exploration of the Progressive Care Certified Nurse Certification. And in this second video, we'll be discussing the next steps in preparing for the PCCN, okay? And so I've entitled this presentation, Plan Your Work, Then Work Your Plan. So let's dig in. So let's review some of our goals for this presentation. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to describe the scope of the PCCN exam, determine a time frame for exam preparation, and explore the different methods for exam preparation. In addition to exploring the different methods that are available, I will tell you the tools and the methods that I use to prepare for the PCCN exam, along with some of my results. Now we'll be discussing the scope of the PCCN exam, and we're going to be looking at different criteria. The first criteria that we're going to be discussing is the eligibility requirement to test. So to test for the PCCN exam, you have to have a current, unencumbered United States registered nurse or advanced practice registered nurse license. Essentially, your nursing license has to be current and it has to be unencumbered. It can't have any dings from the state board or any other regulatory organizations associated with the license. Now, the next criteria that we'll be discussing is the practice hour requirement. And we've alluded to this briefly in our first video about the PCCN exam. You have to have clinical experience in your specialty area to be eligible to sit for this particular exam. And the administrators of this exam have designated two different options to get these practice hours. The first is a 2-year option. So you have to have 1,750 hours of direct patient care with 875 hours of patient care being rendered in the year preceding the application to go for this 2-year option. So what does that really look like? Well, 1,750 practice hours divided by the typical 12-hour shifts that we work would equate to approximately 146 shifts. If you're working your 312s, then you're doing 12 shifts per month on average for a 4-week month, okay? So 146 shifts divided by your 12 shifts per month, that would equate to approximately 12.2 months over a 2-year period of direct patient care. Now there is this caveat. 875 of those 1,750 hours have to be delivered in the year preceding exam application. So over a 2-year period, you have to do at least 6 months in the first year and then 6 months in the balance. And so it seems like they want you to have a fair amount of progressively current experience, okay? So you have to have at least 6 months 1 year and 6 months the other year, approximately, to equate to the 12.2 months of experience that you need over that 2-year period. Okay, we'll look at the other option under the practice hours. There is a 5-year option, and that is mandating that you have 2,000 hours of direct patient care, with 144 of those patient care hours being accrued in the most recent year preceding the application. So what does that look like? Well, using the math that we used before, it's approximately 14 months of direct patient care experience being accrued over a 5-year period, with 144 hours, or about a month of that experience, being accrued in the year preceding exam application. And I've certainly said a lot, but what does it all mean? Okay, well, I think they have these different practice hour requirement options to cover different scenarios for nurses. Of course, we have our full time nurses, and we ardently and religiously do our 3 shifts or more per week. But you also have part time nurses and per diem nurses. You have travelers who may take time off between assignments. You have nurses that are on sabbatical for educational reasons or perhaps for injury. So, having these different practice hour requirement options covers pretty much everybody. So, look at the option that best relates to your experience and choose the option that suits you best. Okay, continuing on in our criteria for PCCN exam scope, we're going to now talk about the practice hour verification. So remember all of those practice hour requirements that we discussed in the prior slide, the 2-year or the 5-year option? Well, it all has to be verified. You have to have a supervisor, a fellow colleague, either a nurse or a physician, sign off and validate that you, in fact, did accrue those clinical practice hours. And you have to be in integrity with this. Some of our applications are chosen for audit. So, I mean, just be in integrity and make a plan if you don't have those practice hour minimums yet. Make a plan to accrue those different practice hours. And hey, while you're accruing those hours, you can begin to study. And we'll talk about developing a time frame for study in another video. But, go ahead and get your practice hours in. I mean, it can only complement your exam preparation. Another criteria that's important to note is this is primarily a computer based exam. And I have noted an asterisk here because there can be a paper pencil option, but it's kind of an accommodation that you have to apply for. But largely, it's a computer based exam similar to the NCLEX. I mean, I think it's the same company, the PSI company that administers the exam. So it's computer based. It's 125 multiple choice questions, but only 100 of those questions are actually scored. So 25 of those questions are used for research purposes, perhaps to be considered on future tests. So you don't, of course, know which of the 125 are the research ones or the actual ones. So do your very best to answer each question correctly. The exam is approximately 2.5 hours long. So again, just how I think, you have 125 questions, you have 150 minutes to answer those questions, and so you're looking at about 1 minute and 23 seconds per question. Why is this important to know? Well, this is an application level exam. In other words, there's not going to be any, what does this disease process mean? Nothing like that. You're going to be given vignettes similar to what you would face in any different patient case on your floor. You're going to be given vignettes with clinical data, different descriptions. Some of that is going to be extraneous information that you're not going to need to answer the question, and some of that is going to be information that is integral to answering the question. So you're going to be deciphering what's important to note. So again, you're going to be using many of the test taking skills that we used in taking the NCLEX. So you're going to have to practice, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. You're going to have to drill. You're going to have to learn how to kind of go to the questions first and then go to the vignettes to find out what you need to answer it correctly. And you're going to have to be fairly efficient in answering the question. So that's why I kind of provided that note of the time of the average time that you'll have to answer the question, because that is important to note in preparing for the exam. And our next criteria is very important, the cost. Money makes our world go round. So we we have to know how much this exam costs. Okay, so it's $180 for people that are members of the AACN, and it's as we complete our discussion of the scope of the PCCN exam, we're going to talk about the offerings of this exam, the frequency of the offerings. The exam is offered year-round, Monday through Saturday. So there are no windows that you have to comply with or anything like that when you're ready to register for the exam. You just go ahead and register, and you can take it any day, Monday through Saturday, all year. Now, let's talk about a time frame for exam preparation. In his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey talks about beginning with the end in mind. And this is so important in our planning process. I mean, planning helps us to do that. We see our goal is to have the PCCN, and we're kind of working backwards, okay? So, begin to visualize yourself preparing, taking the test, acquiring the credential, and work backwards. So when working backwards, we're looking at this test plan, okay? The test plan just gives a description of the different content areas that are highlighted on the exam and the percentages in which they are covered. So as you see for the PCCN exam, cardiovascular represents 33% of the exam. That's about a third. That's more than a third of the exam. So that is extremely important to note. Pulmonary is 14%. Endocrine, heme, GI, and renal represent 18% of the exam. Neuro, multisystem, and behavioral represent 15% of the exam. And professional caring and ethical practice represent 20% of the exam. So if you're looking here and you're making any type of analysis, you certainly see cardio as being heavily weighted, but professional caring and ethics is the second heaviest weighted category in this test. And so we definitely want to keep that in mind as we approach exam preparation. And then, of course, endocrine, heme, GI, and renal are next, followed by neuro and multi-system and behavioral, and lastly, pulmonary. So this can kind of equate to really how long we're going to study on each section. Certainly, cardiovascular is huge on this exam, and I have to be honest, cardio almost took me out. I mean, when I was preparing, it was almost like, am I done with this section yet? But at the end of it, you will understand why cardiovascular is so overarching and it's so important. And afterwards, you're certainly going to feel good, and you're going to feel qualified, and you're going to feel knowledgeable about that area. So again, this is our test plan, and this should inform how we're going to approach the intensity that we're going to approach the PCCN exam studying process with. Now we're going to talk about the time frame for exam preparation, and there's a couple of things that I want you to know. Among them, the exam preparation time is not the same thing as the registration window period, okay? You're going to take X amount of months to prepare for this exam. After that, you're then going to register for the exam. So even the AACN recommends that you study first for the exam, and then you register for the exam. There are 90 days within that registration period that you will be able to sit for the exam to test, okay? So, once you're registered, you'll get different information, and you'll be linked in with PSI. You'll have to go on their calendar, and within that 90-day of registration window time, they're going to have different dates. So within that 90 days, you'll choose a date, Monday through Saturday, that works for you. So I am just trying to emphasize that, depending on how long it's going to take you to prepare for this exam, we're not ready to register for it quite yet. Maybe give yourself, say, 4 months to test, to study rather for the exam. We're going to be preparing. We're going to be going over those systems that we studied before. We're going to be testing, preparing to study on cardio and multi-system and all of these different areas. And you're going to do that within the time frame that you allot. And then once you feel ready, you're going to go ahead and register. And then you'll have 90 days, a window of 90 days within to test. So you'll go on and you'll say, oh, I'm ready to test next week. And you'll look on the calendar for the testing center and see what available appointments they have. And maybe you'll say, you know what? I'm going to take my time and just really be sure I have this. So I'm going to test within that third month of the 90-day period. And so you choose your sitting time to test accordingly. So again, you have 90 days in which to take the test once you have registered for the test. But that has nothing to do with the amount of time that it's going to take you to prepare for the test. I hope that's clear. So now let's talk about the different modalities available for exam preparation. First, we're going to talk about books. There's so many different reference books that are available, and I'll speak to at least some of those a little bit when I talk to you about what I use to prepare for the exam. Then, of course, review courses are available. There are a variety of online courses. There are brick and mortar courses, maybe offered by different entities, and then there are employee-sponsored courses. Maybe your hospital, the educators there have a course, different during different quarters for that particular certification. You can certainly inquire about that. And then there are AACN endorsed and other organizations that provide review courses. I mean, there are many. So do your searches, do your research, base it on how best you learn, and look at which type of review course is most useful or beneficial to you. And then there are practice exams and assessments, and these are crucial. I spoke to earlier the average time for each question. Well, these practice exams and assessments are going to help you hone and make your timing more efficient as you test. So it's good for you to get your foot wet in terms of what to expect. And how you budget your time to answer these questions. So these are some of the modalities that are available for PCCN exam preparation. Okay, let's talk about the modalities that I use to prepare for this exam. Okay, books. I used primarily the Progressive Care Nursing Certification, authored by Thomas S. Ahrens and others. This was published in 2011. Here's what the book looks like. It's about 599 pages. It's a pretty heavy book. What I liked about it is it had area tests after each system, so that was good. As well, it included a CD that had 2 comprehensive exams, mirroring the PCCN exam. Okay, so that is key because I got a sense of how I was grasping each content area as I went through the studying process, and then I was able to get a grasp of how I collectively was doing with these exams. And I used one of the exams maybe midway through my preparation just to kind of see how I was doing and see which areas perhaps I needed to focus more on. And then the second of the comprehensive exams I used at the end of my whole studying process. So this was my Bible. This was also a great reference that I started to take with me to work. It's a bit heavy to lug around, but sometimes I kept it with me. Sometimes I would put it in my locker and then refer as needed. But again, this is a great resource. It spoke to the way that I learn, which is I like a lot of context around my learning. I know some people don't need all of that, and so perhaps other modalities would be more useful for them. So again, you have to know what works for you. Okay, the other books that I used to prepare were the ACE, the PCCN You Can Do It Study Guide by Nicole Kupchik it was published in 2017. And I also used the ACE, the PCCN PCCN exam. You can do it, practice review questions with rationales by the same author. And these I downloaded onto my phone with Kindle. And again, excellent resources. This would more probably cater to the people who may not need all of that. Okay, what else I used to prepare? I used an online review course. This course was offered by the AACN, and it was the PCCN/PCCNK Certification Review Course. Again, a wonderful modality. It was great because it's asynchronous. I mean, 2 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock at night, I could go on and log in and run the course, and it was excellent. It was offered by a content expert, and I believe it was available for a discount because I was an AACN member, so that was a very useful modality to prepare. And I also took practice exams and some of the assessments. I told you about the exams that were available in the book that I used, the Progressive Care Nursing Certifications by Thomas Ahrens. That had a practice exam, and also I purchased the practice exam by the AACN, the PCCN, and the PCCNK self-assessment exam. So again, these are all these evaluations provide useful feedback. That's all it is, feedback. Now, when you take the exam and perhaps you score lower than you thought you would have, it's feedback, and it informs you on which areas perhaps that you have to study more, and it just gives you a sense of what the testing questions are like and how you need to pace yourself. So I would definitely recommend at some point before you test that you do invest in some practice exams so that you can become familiar with the exam. Other important details to note: it took me about 6 months to prepare for this exam. As I told you before, full disclosure, cardiac took me out. I had some attitudes with cardiac. I got my life during the cardiac studying period, and then I had to stop my life during that period. But, in total, it took me about 6 months. Again, I have a very busy life, lots of commitments, 3 kids, a lot going on. So, there were times that I took, periods off, I mean, weeks. But important to know, you got to get back on that horse and get back up again and do it. So perhaps I could have done it in less time, but it was 6 times for me, and I am totally okay with that. Okay, so some tips. You need to have a set schedule. I studied a lot on my days off from work when the house was quiet and everybody was gone. I got some good studying time in there that way. And I study alone, that's what works for me. I didn't really, I mean, I had a review course online, but again, it was just me. I didn't have anything with other people, other people pushing me on, holding me accountable. It was all just me. That may not work for everybody, but given my unique situation and all the demands and everything I was dealing with, I wanted to determine, oh, this day is good for me, or at the drop of a dime, I don't feel like it, I'll hit it again, when I have my next day off. So independent study worked for me. And again, it's how you study. I like a lot of context to paint the picture. I like my details. And so that's why that Thomas Ahrens book worked for me well. I used all of the different resources. I used the books. I used the online courses. I used the self-assessment. So you have to determine which tools and resources you're going to need. You may not need all of that, so you determine what you're going to use and make a plan and go for it. And you have to have some accountability system. I had a lot of personal accountability because I studied by myself, but I had people that knew that I was taking the exam. A big shout out to my husband, who was like, you need to go ahead and take that exam, because I just felt, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know. He was like, take the exam, honey. So I took the exam and I passed. So you have to have a community to help you be accountable. Of course, nothing trumps my personal accountability, in my opinion, but it's good to have those people around you who can hold you accountable and say, look, you've had enough. I've seen you study diligently. It's time to go ahead and attack this beast. So big shout out to Hubs for. So, how did all this preparation and all of these resources, what was the outcome? How did it work for me? Well, I mean, you always hope for the maximum score that you can get, but I got an 86. So, 86% or 86 raw questions out of the 100 testable questions that I responded to were correct. So I'm okay with that. The pass rate, as we see at my score report, was 68, and my strongest area was neuro, multi-system, and behavioral, and that seems that it should be because that's the area that I practice. I'm on a neuro step down floor. So it seems like the area for the most opportunity with me was endocrine, heme, GI, and renal. Again, four big areas kind of slumped under one topical branch. So I got a 78. So I mean, this is the end result, and I passed. But had I been getting this feedback as I was, doing the different using the different modalities to prepare, that would be indicative of a need to kind of maybe revisit some of those areas. And I will continue to do that even though I have passed the exam. So, yeah, 86. This is my score. And I think that all the modalities that I used, it certainly helped me. As we close, we have successfully discussed the scope of the PCCN exam. We know that it's important to determine a time frame for studying for this exam, and we've also been privy to different modalities for exam preparation, okay? And you can certainly choose which of those modalities work best for you. And finally, we know that we're just going to have to study. We're going to have to attack this beast. We're going to have to develop a system, implement that system, and certainly have our accountability, our self accountability, and accountability community to keep us on track. So, this is the end of our presentation, and I just again want to thank you for joining me. I hope that the information shared is beneficial, and I hope that you're beginning to get your plans ready to study for this exam. So, stay tuned for our post test, and thanks again. Okay, question number 1 in our post test. The PCCN exam consists of how many questions? Choice A, 250. Choice B, 100. Choice C, 125. Or choice D, 150. So 250 is not correct. 100, we've heard that number, but that too is not correct. It's not 150. The exam consists of 125 questions, of which 100 are actually scored. 25 of those questions are used for research purposes. So you're going to have 125 questions to complete for this exam. Question 2, true or false? I have 90 days to study for the PCCN exam. 90 days to study for the PCCN exam. Is that true or false? And the answer is false. Remember, you determine how long you want to study for the exam. And once you are ready, you're confident that you've conquered the material, you will register for the test, and they will have a 90-day window. So that 90 days is the window that you have to take the test. 90 days from the day you register, you have a window within to pick an appointment to test for the exam. So this question of 90 days to study is categorically false. Our final question, Nurse Nikki O used which of the following modalities to prepare for the PCCN exam? A, books. B, online review course. C, practice exams, self-assessments. Or D, all of the above. Okay, of course, I used all of these modalities to prepare for my PCCN exam. Over the 6-month course that I prepared, I used books, I used the online review course, I did practice exams and self-assessment. So all of these were helpful to me, and so I hope that this presentation has given you a sense of the scope of the exam, given you some ideas for how you're going to prepare, and got you, ready and motivated to embark on this journey and attack this beast and begin studying. Our next presentation, we are going to jump right into clinical content. God help us. Yes, we're going to do it. We're going to start on our clinical content review. We're going to start with cardio. So I certainly encourage you to tune in for those series of presentations. And I'm excited for you. I'm excited that you're doing this. And I look forward to partnering with you. Have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.